Welcome to Session 6 of today's Roundtables US. I'm John Weaver, contributing editor at PV Magazine USA. As you've heard, we're broadly speaking about the manufacturing renaissance that the IRA has brought to the country. And specifically for this roundtable, we're going to focus on the promise of community solar. With strong policies and incentives fueling the market for locally generated and accessible energy, what are the chances in serving this growing demand? The Biden administration has set a goal of achieving about 30 to 35 gigawatts of community solar to be deployed by 2035. The administration also put some teeth in the Inflation Reduction Act to make it happen. The truth is, though, this is a very challenging goal. It's going to be very hard to reach this number. However, we do have many people working hard to make it happen, and some of them happen to be here with us today. More to that in just a moment. We're here with a great team of individuals, all heavily involved in the community solar field. First, we've got Richard Caperton. He's the Vice President of Policy and Market Development at Arcadia. Richard's team makes the software that connects the solar plant to the bank, to the end user, and the electricity bills. All that money then runs back to the solar asset owner. Leslie Elder, she's a Vice President of Political and Regulatory Affairs at Summit Ridge. Leslie needs to know how the legislation works so that her company can develop solar power projects. Molly Knoll, she's the Vice President of Policy with the Coalition for Community Solar Access. Molly talks to regulators and politicians to get them to implement community solar programs designed in a certain manner. Last is one of those regulators, David Sandback. He's the Vice President of Distributed Energy Resources and Transportation at NYSERDA. NYSERDA and David's teams implement the programs given to them by politicians. To start off, I'd like to ask Richard first. Your technology is kind of quiet in all of this. Your tools sit in between the solar power plant, the solar developer, the legislation. How can legislation and the IRA help you do your job better and program better tools?
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here with all of you. So you're right. We sit at the corner of, or at the intersection of the physical asset of the community solar project and a state regulator or the utility and other people that are stakeholders, and the most important stakeholder, the customer. And what we're excited about with the IRA is that it brings new customers to the table. So projects that receive additional tax credits through the IRA or other incentives have a desire, have a new incentive to serve low-income customers and other disadvantaged customers. Our software is well equipped to handle those customers, better serve those customers, to provide a great experience for those customers, to identify those customers. And so we see this being a pretty big driver for our business. To be clear, we succeed, we thrive when community solar in general thrives. There aren't specific things in the IRA that are targeted at Arcadia or at software companies. It really is about bringing community solar to more people and more people that need it the most. And that's where we're ready to help.
Have you seen state legislators write documentation, laws, regulations that help the software aspect of it?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different things that a state could do. For example, different states have different rules on how a low-income customer can demonstrate their income or verify their income. And what we find is that states that allow customers to do that by showing that they participate in other income qualified programs is really valuable. There's actually a pretty interesting project coming from the Department of Energy in coordination with the Department of Housing and Urban Development right now that's related to how we could better qualify customers that receive LIHEAP benefits for community solar projects. I know that New York is a state that's working with DOE on that, and David could talk more about that, or certainly deeper on it than I am, but that's a really innovative way to bring different software technologies together to better serve customers.
All right, thank you. Leslie, as you're a policy expert that's working with a solar developer, Summit is in many states across the nation, and you have a responsibility to know all of those states to some degree. When do you, working with a developer, make a decision to get involved with policy? Is it early so that you can suggest to states what to do? Is it in the middle once you see the states start to make a move? Or is it later once the states have signed laws that now it's time for you to understand and know what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think it's important to note that the community solar industry is not completely a monolith. And so I think a lot of industry leaders will have different perspectives on this. But at Summit Ridge, we are a long-term owner and operator. And so we kind of look at the market from the beginning all the way to the end, because we will also own and operate these projects for 40 years. So from our perspective, we think it's really important to get into states early, mostly because we want to make sure that we're working with local stakeholders in order to be able to hear what they are looking for and what they need long before a piece of legislation has actually been introduced. But that being said, that doesn't always happen. And so we'll get involved in the legislative process at whatever time we absolutely can. So to your point, I follow about 30 markets for Summit Ridge. We are not developing in all of those markets, but the goal is to be able to ensure that we're helping to bring expertise from other best practices from other markets, but always make sure that we're really matching that with each individual state and the concerns that those states might have.
That's an interesting point you make there. On the one hand, you want to bring best practices, but then you also have to consider the local dynamics of said state.
Correct.
I would guess one of the major dynamics is the different political climate in each state. Are you seeing that the IRA has shifted perspectives at all in maybe some states that weren't as on board with a concept like community solar? Have they, shown a greater interest in community solar now that the IRA has been put out there, or?
I think a little bit of that is yet to be determined. There's a lot of components that are pretty exciting in the IRA that are not directly related to community solar that I think are moving the needle. I do see that in some of the states that have not traditionally been excited about renewable energy development as a whole, not just specifically to community solar, are very excited about the manufacturing, or maybe they're excited about the hydrogen hubs, or they might be excited about some of the other things, which I think is some of the magic associated with the Inflation Reduction Act, bringing a lot of different stakeholders and interested parties together. I also think that there's a lot to be seen on the rollout yet of the IRA and how that's really going to influence some of the investments and how some of the key decision makers and stakeholders really jump at that.
All right, thank you. Molly, you work very early in the development of community solar programs. You get there before the programs exist. You probably, and you kind of talked about this in prior conversations, you have to differentiate how you speak with regulators and with politicians, and you have to decide what aspects of community solar to bring to new markets. Could you tell us a tiny bit about how some of the beginning steps, and also, if you could, tell us the nuance you suggested about the difference between regulators and politicians and how you speak with them?
Sure. I think the key is to stay on topic with each body, right? With a legislature, you want to talk about what they want accomplished. What are the program goals? Is it deployment of megawatts? Is it benefits for low to moderate income customers? Those are the kinds of things you want in good legislation. And as you were asking Leslie, you also have to keep an eye on the politics of your state, right? Messages that are an easy home run in certain states, like New York, for example, that are far ahead of the curve on the clean energy transition, may not resonate quite as well. But some of the economic arguments might resonate better in other states. So with legislatures, you really want to be on the what are they trying to accomplish? And then with regulators, you really want to get into the nitty gritty of how, right? You can go into the weeds with a regulator very happily. You can talk about data exchange, and you can talk about customer acquisition and consumer protection, and you can talk about utility interconnection. And I will tell you that I would never have a conversation about tariff language with a legislator, but the devil's in the details, and it's an incredibly important conversation to have when you do get to the commissions.
And some of those items you mentioned just then, data exchange, customer acquisition, those are items that Richard very much so cares about. Interconnection, of course, is one of Leslie's team's banes that they have to deal with, because we all know interconnection is a challenge. So you're right in the midst of it. David, question for you. You work with NYSERDA and the NY program. Many would argue that this right now is the nation's most successful community solar program. You have somewhere in the lines of 3 to 4 gigawatts deployed, another 2 to 3 gigawatts that's in the pipeline of community solar, and I believe a 10 gigawatt goal by 2030. So very big numbers. Numbers so nice to the point that certain states are reaching out to you folks for advice. Mm-hmm. Specifically, they've been talking about your VEDR program. Would you mind telling us as a whole, and specifically speaking to any regulators and those who might be wanting to emulate your success, some of the ideas and work and what went into the VEDR program that you feel is what makes it successful?
Yeah, sure. And yes, Molly, I'm one of those people you can get fairly weedy with, so we should do that sometime over a cup of coffee. I think it's important that everybody understands why New York decided to really focus on community solar, because that could lead us to VEDR basically. When we look at what we had before community solar, whether it was remote net crediting or commercial rooftop or residential, really what was happening is a lot of the people that when solar volumetrically lowered their bill and got the advantages of the funds that go into paying for the incentives for that project, and then paid less over time because of that. And those who are low income, primarily people who don't own a home or don't have the opportunity to go solar, are going to pay more for that because they can't lower their bill volumetrically. So we decided to say, what can we do in New York State that can provide to become a part of our renewable energy transition and decarbonization, as well as benefiting from lower bills and adopting solar. And community solar checks all those boxes. I don't know anything else that could. So we went heavy into that in 2015, and it took a while. We also realized we have to figure out how to value those projects in a fair way, right? Because I see so many community solar pilot programs that could be a boom and bust, or then not go that far after the pilot program because people are going, oh, this is costing too much money. But when we look at every electron that's exported from that project and what is the value of that electron in several different categories, then it becomes something where it's not a cost, it's a benefit. And then New York Sun provides any type of missing money above and beyond what that project gets through what we call the value stack. So you asked the question, it is the backbone of our distributed energy resources and the backbone of the success of community solar. We couldn't do it without it. You had said some numbers at the beginning. I just want to correct the record a little bit. We have almost about 2 gigawatts of community solar projects deployed in the state of New York and about 3.5 gigawatts in the pipeline.
Right, gaining on 6. Good numbers. I actually was told that you four were having a good, solid conversation in the green room as you were prepping for this. What are the interesting, well, I want to say first, these 4 people, their work is very complementary and kind of leads from one to the other for our watchers. First, Molly works with the regulators and the politicians. She'll get the legislators to put a program in place. Then David's team with NYSERDA and the state, they'll implement the program. Leslie's team would next follow up as a developer, interpret the program, develop the projects, and then Richard's company would come in and help move the cash. So really these 4 people are a kind of a chain who help deploy community solar. And so I got to say thank you for the team at PV Mag for bringing you 4 together. Just a nice complementary group. And so then that leads me back to the comment I just made. When you were in the green room, I was told before this started, you 4 had already started up some good conversations. Were there any particular items that you thought were just interesting that might do our listeners well to hear? or not, if they were touchy ones that I should just get back to my questions with.
So I brought up a little bit of conversation, and it was, I don't think, broadly interesting or applicable to others, but it's always good to get to spend time with David and learn more about how he's thinking about his program in New York. I would say that what was interesting, as David talked about the New York program, is we also believe, and I don't want to speak for Leslie and Molly, but at Arcadia, we definitely believe that New York is the nation's leading community solar program. So much so that we're trying to take the best practices from New York and take them to other states that we think could learn from it. I think California is the best example of that, which is the nation's leading rooftop solar market, but is effectively zero community solar today. And we believe that they should fix that, and that there are a lot of customer benefits and grid benefits to having a meaningful community solar program in the state. And just like David described the dynamic in New York, California is a very sophisticated state that isn't, it has the capabilities to implement something similar to the VEDR tariff. So we are hopeful and eagerly awaiting word from the CPUC in response to proposals that we've made, but we are hopeful that they'll adopt some of New York's best practices and really get that market to take off.
Do you have any suggestions for, other groups in addition to California that you'd like that you tell us about what those best practices are, or one or two of them?
Well, Richard, I would.
Go ahead, David. Sorry.
No, I don't know if I'm going to answer the question, but I will say I always ask this about like with Molly's team that represents New England and New York, like, why don't we take lessons learned from New York on valuing solar like VEDR and bring it to other states? And the answer I get that surprises me sometimes is we're scared of those states not valuing it properly and getting into the weeds like we did in New York and understanding, like not having a NYSERDA basically. And so I think there's a hesitancy to want to do something that could make or break an industry if there's that risk factor there.
So
yeah, that's sort of what I was trying to reference about sophistication in the state. The staffing levels in New York are fantastic and are able to support something like VEDR and really difficult, challenging, complex topics. California is in a similar boat. Not every state, and sadly most states, don't have that level of resourcing to really implement something as meaningful as New York has.
Yeah, and I think another aspect that's really important to mention is the vision, right? You've got a couple of states that have really strong clean energy visions. You've got a smaller subset of states that has really strong equity visions. And community solar really is a policy Swiss Army knife, and it can serve a whole ton of kind of potentially competing, but also potentially complementary policy goals. And so if a state's only focused on one, they may miss community solar and all of the value that it can bring. It's really where you're looking at climate, and you're looking at savings for customers, and you're looking at equitable access, and you're looking at maybe some siting priorities where the value of community solar really starts to kind of rise to the top, because it can do so many different things from a policy perspective.
And I would just like to add, you have to do all those things. That's the problem. Like it took us 2 years to start, and then we had to fix it along the way. So please follow what we did. If you're going to do this, learn from our mistakes. I did that from California most of my career. Now I was out front in New York doing it. So definitely call us up and ask about lessons learned. Happy to provide those.
there you go. Call David, everybody. He's open for it.
I think also I'd like to just like tone in a little bit on what Molly had said, where I think where you have states that do have visions around climate and equity, community solar can really play a very important role. And you've seen states, although they're not as sophisticated as New York, but you have states that are starting to move in that direction. I do want to call the elephant in the room, which is we've got a lot of states out there that don't necessarily have visions around climate or equity, and are really kind of looking at the IRA from an investment of manufacturing. And so I do think that it is behoove all of the folks that are on this call to kind of take the best practices of New York, but really apply to a different frame of going back to what Molly had said at the beginning of really matching the politics with the goals of that state and the key decision makers. How do we take a state that may be a fossil fuel generator that looks at the IRA to say, oh, we can have some manufacturing opportunities, and then really tie in how community solar is a beneficial factor in that supply chain and can really provide choice and savings and jobs, which is a little bit of a different frame than what we see in maybe like the Northeast and or in California.
You make good points there, because for most folks, solar is save the environment. But for a lot of people, it's about jobs, and it's about local energy, and it's about clean energy. We think about, say, the Northeast, where we have New York, which has its very strong goals, and its neighboring state, Pennsylvania, which has been debating community solar for a long time, and whose local politicians care very much so about supporting coal, supporting natural gas, and not passing on costs to other groups. And as you know, all of us watch, PV Magazine covers it regularly, but we watch the turbulations of Pennsylvania, and laws get submitted, they get pulled back. And Molly, how do you see a state like Pennsylvania or these other states that are kind of teetering? How do you get into those relationships, shake a hand, or push it forward? It sounds like a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah, it certainly is. So fortunately, that's primarily our new markets person, Elizabeth. She's a rock star. But I think community solar is really, because it is a Swiss Army knife, solar is already economically, it can go head to head with fossil fuel generation, right? It's in the distribution grid, so it bypasses interconnection queues. I promise I'm in the weeds because of the audience, and I would not say all of these things necessarily with a legislator. But community solar brings a whole bunch of additional benefits beyond climate. And so leaning into those other parts of the conversation, I think, are an important part of the aspect. The clean energy transition's coming, right? There are, the federal funding is rolling down the hill and nobody's stopping it right now. And so states either can be part of that and reap some of those benefits in manufacturing and in jobs and in lower energy costs, or they can get left behind. And so I think making sure that the states understand that this really is a once in a generation opportunity to bring benefits to their constituents, separate and aside from anybody's either beliefs or feelings or opinions on climate change, is a really important part of the conversation. This is a benefit for farmers that want to diversify their cash flow by having solar on some, less productive acreage. This is an opportunity for cities to put on, municipal buildings, or for warehouses to put on municipal buildings and serve some of their workers. It really is a much more broadly attractive proposition than just the greenhouse gas aspect.
Talking about just solar business in general, we have this terminology that all of us dislike but have to deal with. It's called the solar coaster. It's when, business ramps up. David, you sort of referenced it for a moment. Business ramps up, you have a great program, companies come in, they work hard, they fill out the program, and then it takes Molly to go back to the politicians and re-up the next round. And that takes 2-3 years. That's just the reality of things. With community solar, as you said, Molly, smaller projects that are spread out allow business across more companies, more local workers, than fewer and further away larger projects. How have you all seen various states attempt to deal with the business continuity challenges of solar developers? And maybe we'll let Leslie answer last, because one of the things that a group like Summit has done is that they've crossed many states. So instead of having one solar coaster, they get to ride 30 solar coasters, and hopefully they balance each other out. But maybe starting with you, Molly, how do we address business continuity? Because that's what allows solar developers to have good competitive prices, hold on to employees for a long time.
A lot of aspects of the solar coaster are outside of state control, right? It's, Fed interest rates and general economic pressures. And so there's not a lot an individual state can do about those. But what is within the state control is program continuity. So number one, they can open markets. And I would argue that community solar is past the pilot phase, and permanent markets without caps should be what states are looking at now. Two, state public utility commissions can really be looking at their oversight of their utilities, interconnection reform, distribution system planning for broader DER adoption. Those are things that states can be doing right now. And then third, if there is a specific incentive or program, such as Solar for All, which applications are due at midnight for anybody who's watching and needs to pop back into that. Solar for All is going to be 5 years. And I think states should get their applications in. They should get the money next year, and they should start planning for what the successor program is. Because when you have state programs that sunset without, a planned off-ramp or some predictability for industry, that's where the states really can start, contributing to that solar coaster and really hurting the development of the market that the federal grants are looking at, and that I think the states are trying to produce as well.
Richard, your team has to go find electricity buyers in every single state, and a lot of your acquisition is literally knocking on the doors of individuals. When you see a program ramp up, ramp down, how does your group manage that, cross over? And you even saw it in New York, which is, as you said, a great market. Around a few years back, the incentives ran out. There was a very open window for about 1.25 years where there was technically no program. And during that window, what did a company like yours do?
Sure. So we manage community solar projects across 14 states. We manage 2 gigawatts worth of projects. Those projects serve more than 200,000 customers. And sort of others have alluded to this, but diversification is a key element there, and that geographic diversification has worked really well for Arcadia. And so there have been times when some markets might slow down and we see other markets picking up and we can reallocate resources some. So that works for us. We also see that a lot of the developers that we work with, the asset owners like Summit Ridge, they are also geographically diversified and many times have diverse business models, so that some of their projects are community solar projects, some are not community solar projects, and that is good for those businesses. We also are, we probably over allocate resources, or we err on the side of heavy allocation of resources to states that have a track record of continuity and stability, and states that have a really good framework that looks like it's going to exist for a long time. We do see states that say, we'll have a 1-year program, it's going to be a small number of megawatts, and we'll see what happens after that. And that's super risky for us. We can manage a small number of projects in those states, but it's hard to build all the tools that you need to serve customers in those markets. And every state is different. They're all going to require some different customer protections, and that's fine, but it's a cost to enter a new market. And so there are other states like, Molly's state of Maryland is a great example that has made a long-term policy commitment to community solar. We see policy stability there, and that is a much stronger and more attractive market for us.
Leslie, how have you folks managed to, deal with, first off, they hired you to help interpret policy and its continuity or not. How have, as an organization, what has Summit done to weather the coaster?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, my job is to work with Molly's and David's of the world in order to make sure that there is that level of certainty. I think certainty is something that is incredibly important to all businesses, certainly important to Summit Ridge. But going off of a little different, I think we also really look at innovation and not only how we can diversify our assets, but also how we invest in the communities so we can show our worth and why there needs to be actual certainty into the program itself. So the example that I can give you is actually in Illinois. So we love the Illinois community solar market. We think that they've done a really good job and look forward to continuing to grow our portfolio there. But one of the things that we do in addition to building our community solar assets, both on roofs and on ground mounts, is that we will invest in workforce development programs, or we'll invest in working with schools or really diving into the community itself. So it is a give and take of we're making investments both from an energy perspective, but also a community perspective. So we're doing that long-term engagement. And I think the more certainty, to Richard's point, that you can have within a state market, the more that you will see companies like Summit Ridge continue to make those type of investments, because we're there for the long haul, and we want to be good partners and good stewards of the relationship that we have for the next 40 years that we're going to be there.
So Richard and Molly, both of you see a stable market, obviously, as a place where you're willing to invest more. Well, Richard and Leslie, pardon. Both of you see a stable market as a place where you're willing to invest more resources, which might create a virtuous cycle of sorts. More resources, more stability, more solar, more jobs, etc. David, how does NYSERDA see these conversations? When there was that year and a quarter, year and a half without a solar incentive, what were the discussions going on in the back rooms about how to be continuous?
Yeah, I mean, at NYSERDA, our job is to not only think about community solar and the solar industry, it's to think about the ratepayer impact, it's to think about legislation efforts, it's to think about our Public Service Commission and how they might think about a particular petition or not. So we have to be big picture thinkers, which is important. And we sort of pride ourselves as being in between, public and private sectors, even though we're officially public, but we feel like we're in between, and try to take a neutral approach. But, I think that the boom and bust issue is real. And when we didn't have an incentive on the streets, it was because it was too hot. It ran too fast. And then it's always running hot, and we have to make that. I feel like sometimes I'm running the Federal Reserve here, where you can't run too hot because it backfires, and the solar industry will fight that. They'll want it to be hot, but that's a bad thing. I think a boom and bust is sometimes worse than no boom at all. And we have to be really careful with that. And so, yeah, we were putting forth together a roadmap for an entire year to figure out how to do it right. And that's why people were waiting, because we had to publish, a 200-page document, and have that take all those perspectives I just mentioned into consideration. And the commission adopted it. And now we have, 10 gigawatts by 2030 goal. And quite honestly, our midpoint review was, hey, we now, for the first time, have federal tailwinds. We could probably do more for the same money. And the commission's going to decide on that as well.
So at minimum, it's great to hear that you are thinking about it aggressively behind the doors and pushing it forward. In the IRA, there's a 10% low-income community solar adder. We've seen a few pieces of guidance come out, and sometime now, or maybe now, Leslie, you probably know, but there's a document we should all be filling out online, submitting community solar projects to this. Leslie, do you have an opinion? You might want to be careful because you don't want to piss off the people at the Treasury Department, but do you have an opinion on the quality of this program, how it's been set up, how you can work with it? Is it enough? Will it drive business? Is it a little too tiny and it will slow people down as they try to wait to join it? Like, what do you think is going to come from that program, and based on the guidance out there so far?
I will say, first and foremost, it's October 19th is when the portal opens. There you go. We're all eagerly awaiting for that date to happen. I think anytime that you have a good policy in order to drive behavior, I think is good. It's a huge piece of legislation with a lot of moving parts that is going to take a number of years in order to kind of iron some of those things out. But I would say overall, I think we're mostly pleased with what has come out from Treasury on the low-income bonus tax credit. And I'm eager to see after the first year how it actually drives market behavior, and how we can actually see a more rapid deployment of specifically community solar, but solar generation in general that is giving meaningful financial benefits to low-income consumers, which I think is one of the cornerstone elements of the IRA. I also think that it's really great that they have really pushed forward and made this the, not necessarily the first, but like one of the biggest pieces that they've been pushing forward coming out of the IRA, just kind of like cornerstone that this is the thing that they really care about. So I think there's a lot to still be seen, and I'm very eager to apply and get capacity and serve low-income folks.
That's good. Are there any pieces of the language so far that you'd like to see refined, made better going forward so that we can, so that the program works a little better?
Of course. I mean, we're the solar industry, and I think that we always have the ideas that we want to have things get improved. But, I also think that there's going to be lessons learned over this first application period that I am ill prepared to even speak on. So I really kind of want to get through this first application period so we can kind of really sit down and say, lessons learned, best practices. These are really good. This is, I think the best part about the IRA is it's a long-term commitment into the clean energy or into the clean energy transition. And so there's going to be the opportunities to kind of figure out what this looks like and really drive this industry in a meaningful way. And to that, I am extremely excited and congratulate Treasury on all of the hard work that they've done to get this done.
Yeah, and there's a lot more in the IRA other than that 10% adder. I mean, you're talking about the interconnection costs in the cost basis of the ITC. You're talking about a 30% tax credit if you have prevailing wage. You're talking about pushing this towards all community solar and projects towards prevailing wage and fair income. So there's a lot to this other than just that 10% adder. The 10% adder in my mind is challenging because it's a lottery-based system. And if you can't, that's what my whole mantra has been, transparency and certainty will lower costs. And this isn't that right now. So to Leslie's point, I would love to see that adapt over time.
Since we have about a minute and a half left, anybody, an idea that you want to make sure gets recognized across the nation by regulators, by politicians, that's within the IRA, that you'd like to see them grab onto and make sure it's well implemented? And Molly, you may have started it by saying the Solar for All program. What aspects of the IRA do you really want to see everybody grab and talk about nationwide?
I mean, I'd love to see a lot of folks leaning into the benefits that community solar can bring. So Solar for All really gets at that wide variety of policy goals, right? If you read what EPA is scoring based on, community solar comes as close to hitting all of those as anything does, but states are going to still need well-rounded programs. Same with the low-income bonus credit and prevailing wage. The IRA is trying to do a lot of different jobs, and it's asking folks with a lot of different hats to step in. And community solar has a lot of potential to serve those needs. And so I really would encourage folks to think about how those competing priorities get kind of weighed and balanced against each other, right? Equity versus immediate deployment versus long-term wealth building versus, all the other things that they're asking for people to be delivering. Community solar can do them all, but people have to get realistic about how quickly and which first.
Well, Molly, you got to finish out our panel. Appreciate the time that the four of you have given us. It's been really educational. And, right here, we talked about community solar, how legislatures and regulators can put laws in place in combination with the IRA to help community solar be better deployed. And really, going forward, we have a lot of 10 years. We have 10 years plus of work to do with the IRA and community solar. So all four of you, please keep working very hard, taking care of us. And now it's time to hand this back to my colleague and senior editor at PV Magazine USA, Ann Fischer.
Thank you, John. That concludes our 6 roundtable sessions covering the latest developments in the U.S. solar industry as a result of the IRA. Here at PV Magazine, we look forward to watching and reporting on the increasing build-out of the U.S. solar industry. We certainly took some key insights away from today. Please visit us at pvmagazineusa.com for the latest solar industry news. We have many thanks to express. First and foremost, thank you to the wonderful audience for joining us today. We value your feedback, so please take a moment to fill out the survey, and it'll appear after we conclude today. Your insights are invaluable, and we do this for your benefit. A special shout out to our event partners who made all of this possible. Thank you for your contributions to today's event. Special thanks to the lead partner, Nextracker, and platinum partners, Longi and Trina Solar. We'd also like to extend heartfelt thanks to our speakers for sharing their expertise, contributing to the discussions, delivering informative and thought-provoking presentations. It was a genuine pleasure to have you with us. Our gratitude extends to everyone in front and behind the scenes. A big thank you to our dedicated PV Magazine events team, who ensured the smooth execution of our live events and kept this and our panelists well prepared for success. We invite our attendees to stay on the virtual platform for a little while, continue networking and exploring the partner booths. I'm Ann Fischer, Senior Editor at PV Magazine USA. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this event as much as we did. We look forward to seeing you again at the Roundtables US 2024.